It operates routes that a lot of jets operate, and as a turboprop it's naturally a little bit noisier. But actually it's a cracking aeroplane for the job it's designed to do, which is fly fairly short sectors efficiently and actually very, very quickly for a turboprop. But I'm not really sure anybody quite understands that it's quite difficult to get the proverbial greaser out of it. It's quite an interesting aeroplane. It lands very differently at different flap settings, which is something we'll get to have a look at later. It's fair to say that if you're a guy whose ego depends on the quality of his landings, flying the Dash is going to slowly become a depressing experience. And nobody's really very sure, but it seems to land more smoothly on a wet runway. It's interesting to compare it to some of the more complicated big jet sims out there, because while those airplanes certainly are more complicated, but what they also have is a lot more systems that do things automatically for you. So although the Dash unarguably is a less complicated airplane than, say, a 747-400, the 747 and particularly the Airbus airplanes will do a lot more of the job for you. So the Dash, by virtue of the fact that it actually has quite a lot of performance, has the capacity to actually be quite a demanding aeroplane. We've got the best part, 5,000 horsepower each side. Certainly below 10,000 feet, the difference in performance between the Q4 and something like a 7.3 or a 3.9, 18, 19, 20 is fairly insignificant. It's very, very good. The systems modelling is pretty much perfect. It replicates everything as far as I can tell, and actually the flight model is very, very good as well. It seems to accurately reflect things like power settings and climb rates, and the behaviour of the aeroplane is actually incredibly close to the real thing. Inevitably, you operate the real aeroplane and it's the feeling in the seat of the pants. You'll feel the sync happening before either the instruments or your eyes see it happening. From the latter stages of the approach and the landing, you're using that feel in the seat of the pants, you're using your peripheral vision, you're using lots of things which inevitably any sim cannot fully replicate. It will vary slightly depending which country, which operator, and which set of rules and regulations you're operating behind. But as a general rule, something in the region of 3 weeks in the classroom doing ground school, 2 weeks in the sim doing about 40 hours in the simulator, 40 or 50 sectors of line training, and obviously before that line training there'll be somewhere between 6 and 12 circuits and landings flown for base training. So somewhere between perhaps 2 to 3.5 months between starting on the dotted line and actually ending up signed off to operate the aeroplane. We have to understand that there's a lot of time spent in the classroom, and actually that before you even get to that classroom, as a bare minimum, you've probably spent 12 to 14 months in full-time flight training to gain commercial licenses. So I'd be lying if I said that when you come out of this in 2 or 3 or 4 hours' time, you're going to have the same knowledge. That's impossible. But what you are going to have is certainly a very good idea of what it's like to fly the aeroplane, a very good understanding of the basics of how the aeroplane operates, and an ability to hopefully fly the sim and operate the sim in a way that is both good fun and enjoyable, but actually pretty close to reality. There are sims out there which do allow you to go straight into flying passengers from going to the sim, but they're for bigger airplanes, and that's for pilots who we assume have quite a degree of experience already. What we need to do is, the sim has taught you how to operate the aeroplane, and the real guys now will be taken into the aeroplane itself to prove essentially that they can land it reasonably successfully with nobody in the back. Somewhere between 6 and 12 circuits and landings flown to a reasonable standard with reasonable landings which reassure the authorities and the owner of the aeroplane that you're now okay to put into the aeroplane, admittedly still with an instructor, but with passengers in the back, to go and start doing what's called line training. There's a number of things we want for base training. The sort of primary thing we want is a decent length runway. So we're actually going to do touch and goes, which is something that in an airliner you very rarely do, and therefore you'd require not a huge runway but a reasonable runway. So we want a decent sized runway. What we also want is a reasonably quiet airport. If you go and try to do some circuit training at London Heathrow, you simply won't be allowed to. So we've seeking a decent runway, somewhere reasonably quiet, and an airport that's allowing us to do it. Actually, Smidge fulfills those three things quite nicely. Now, on all occasions, it may be that actually you'll get airborne from another airport, go to somewhere else, do the base training, then return. So there's lots of options. But East Mids is a nice, easy place to do. It's got an ILS approach, what we want to use today. It's got a decent length runway, and certainly at the weekend it should be quiet enough for us to do what we need to do. The aeroplane is at its best flying sectors of somewhere around an hour. Don't misunderstand that, it will do a 4-hour block time, but over those distances it starts becoming significantly slower than a jet. Most operators will operate it on sectors an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and quite conceivably less than that. So given the average length of a commercial pilot's day, actually a 4-sector day is pretty standard. And also, it's perfectly reasonable to start one place, finish another, and stay there for the night. You have to remember that the aeroplane is designed from its original inception to be operated with an autopilot. And the purpose of autopilot primarily is to reduce pilot workload. Now, when you're a new guy flying an airplane which has probably got a heck of a lot more performance than anything you've operated before, it would simply be silly not to utilise the autopilot to try and reduce that workload slightly.